Let's revisit the concept of free will. Today I'm returning to that knotty question, the question of free will. In some way, it arises naturally from the examination of quantum physics that I've been doing recently, because quantum physics seems to suggest that reality is not fully deterministic, but more of that later. First of all, I want to carry out some thought experiments. Let me introduce you to Alice, our experimental subject. Let's suppose we give Alice a choice between vanilla and chocolate ice cream. Can we predict her choice? Let's suppose, first of all, that we know nothing at all about Alice apart from what we can actually see at the moment. But we do know that, in large populations, 65% of people prefer chocolate to vanilla ice cream. So, without even knowing anything at all about Alice, we can say that there is a 65% chance that she will choose chocolate. Suppose now that we know a little bit more about Alice. Suppose we know that she loves chocolate in general. Okay, that might increase the probability that she will choose chocolate, though it's difficult to give a precise figure to that. Let's say we may now be 75% confident that she will choose chocolate. Let's add a little bit more to that. Let's say now that we know Alice very well, that we've in fact known her from the day of her birth, and that, at least since the age of 2, she's consistently chosen chocolate ice cream. Our confidence level might rise to as high as 99%. Would we put money on it? Probably. Would we bet our life on it? Maybe not. After all, we aren't privy to Alice's thought processes. Suppose she's thinking to herself, I haven't tried vanilla ice cream since I was 2 years old. Maybe my tastes have changed. Maybe I'd like it now. Yeah, I'll take that risk. Or maybe she's thinking, those bastards, they think they know me. They think they'll be able to predict what I'll do. Well, I'll show them. So, in any remotely realistic scenario, there remains some doubt about her choice. There remains a finite positive probability that she will actually choose the vanilla. Okay, so let's suppose that this is no longer a realistic scenario. Let's suppose that I can know absolutely everything about Alice, past and present, down to the smallest level. Yes, even down to the quantum level. But now there's a problem, isn't there? Because we can't know whether Schrodinger's cat is alive or dead until we take a peek. Now, Schroeder himself proposed this thought experiment to illustrate that there must be something fundamentally wrong with quantum physics, as it was currently understood. However, usually it's used as an attempt to illustrate the idea in quantum physics that tiny particles can be in 2 states or more at once until they are observed. To put it in quantum mechanical terms, particles exist in a number of superimposed states, known as eigenstates, described by a wave function. When this wave function interacts with an observer, it collapses into one of those states. Which one of those states it might be is indeterminate, though I think I'm right here. Some of those states are more probable than others. It is, after all, a probability wave function. Now, I know that this is all somewhat counterintuitive, and some physicists flatly reject the idea. Einstein did, in fact. They argue that, despite the apparent observation, there is in fact an underlying determining factor, something that clearly causes one outcome rather than another. We just don't know what that process is yet. They might argue that up until this point, the idea of cause and effect has served us very well. It's really at the basis of experimental science. The idea that it suddenly breaks down at this point is simply unacceptable. It undermines the scientific method. Now, I can see their point, and intuitively, it seems right to expect that some underlying cause determines the collapse of the wave function in one direction rather than another. But perhaps the issue here is psychological rather than scientific. I suspect that the different views on this question stem from this fundamental option, to be a determinist or not to be a determinist. I suspect that this comes first, this conviction, and the scientific argument stems from this conviction. And I suspect that neither position is actually based on science, but rather on how comfortable people are with each of these ideas. Some people are uncomfortable with indeterminism because, as Einstein once said, God doesn't play dice. You might just as easily say the universe doesn't play dice. This is an a priori conviction rather than an empirical observation. On the other hand, those who are not comfortable with determinism are probably unhappy with the idea that they are not free, that their own choices are fully predetermined. Just as an uncaused cause seems counterintuitive, so does an absence of free will, because it certainly feels to us as though we're free and that our choices are our own, some of them at least, to some extent. This is not to deny, of course, that external factors enter into our decision-making process. Let's consider Alice again, and let's accept that we can observe Alice at every level, including the quantum level. We can agree, I think, that before we make those observations, the outcome of Alice's choice is not 100% knowable, though we might make reasonable guesses. Now, if quantum theory as it stands is correct, and the state of all those wave functions that constitute Alice, or at least Alice's brain, are actually indeterminate, that means that we cannot, in fact, in principle, predict Alice's choice with 100% certainty. When we look to determine that state, we in fact force the wave functions to collapse, and we only observe the decision that she has actually made, i.e. the state into which those wave functions have collapsed. So why did we bother? Why not just watch which one she chooses? If quantum theory is not complete, if something is missing, then we would need to be able to discover the causes underlying the collapse of the wave function one way or another. If we knew all of this, we might say, we could, in fact, in principle, predict Alice's decision with 100% certainty, in our thought experiment at least. I can't help thinking, though, that this path will lead to a potentially infinite regress. At some point, there's going to be an uncaused cause, whether we decide to call that God or just accept it as a property of the universe. I'm comfortable with the notion of indeterminacy, and I'm also comfortable with the notion that we don't have to attribute that to anything outside the universe itself. I suspect that this is largely because I find it difficult to concede that my sense of freedom is mistaken, though intellectually I can concede that it may be. So let me conclude with another brief thought experiment. Let's suppose that in this instant, as I say this, I have free will. But now, a second later, I don't have free will. What would be different? What would change? Is there in fact any observable difference between a world in which there is free will and one in which there isn't? I don't think there would be any observable difference, which suggests to me that this is not a scientific question. Neither the hypothesis that we have free will nor the hypothesis that we don't is actually verifiable, or, more importantly, falsifiable. Maybe will itself can be represented as a wave function with several eigenstates. It only collapses into one of those states when I observe myself taking one particular action rather than any other.